In a world where the most powerful people in existence dress like this, why did the Hunger Games portray the rich, powerful, and fascist as fancy effete femmes? How come sci-fi gets all the most chic fascists? These guys get a horrifying bisexual dictator with slightly gender-bending quirks, and we get this? If you can't even succumb to global tyranny in style, what is the point? Big Brother is watching you, and he looks like shit. Heterosexual blandness means humanity will go out with a whimper. The cruel elite of the Hunger Games are cunts, yes, but they are also serving cunt. The Capitol is full of colour and eyeliner and opulence and wigs, the shiniest of teeth, and maybe just a smidge too much foundation, which all hits, quite frankly, as a bit gay, the future the libs want. In the books, President Snow is much more feminine, described as having had lip injections or some other work. So we have a world in which wealth is equated with femininity and looks quite different from the practical uniform outfits of the rebellion, and very different from, wait, what in the tradwife happened to Katniss Everdeen? Unlike Effie's femininity, Katniss's femininity is authentic. It's stripped back, it's maternal. Effie is far too effete. That is to say, pampered, marked by weakness and decadence. Katniss's femininity is so natural to her that even when she gets her legs waxed, we see that she never even had any leg hair to begin with. The true femme, tradwife Katniss. So why, when fascism looks a hell of a lot more like District 12 and Donald Trump, do we imagine a fascist world which looks so distinctly femme? Well, Madame Guillotine has the answer for us. There was a time when the height of masculinity looked like the drag race runway, and that time was pre-revolutionary France. That's right, before we started threatening to decapitate the rich. Yes, like the Capitol, they were stylish, they wore tights, they wore wigs.
Do you wear wigs?
Their clothes were decorative and opulent. But all these displays of decadence were not a good look, check your privilege. So, at least in part, because of the threat of getting more than a little trim off the top, the fashion changed. Men and women went from looking like they were on their way to gossip about Marie Antoinette to looking like he's about to prescribe her 3 months on the coast to recover from female hysteria. It was the beginning of quiet luxury. Fashion switched from being class-based to being gender-based, and henceforth, men would be forced to wear nothing but suits for the rest of time. And this shift is called the Great Masculine Renunciation. Today, gendered fashion is divided like this. Masculinity is strong. Femininity is delicate, utilitarian, decorative, geometric, curvaceous, uniform, diverse, blue, pink, subject, object. Fashion isn't just gendered, fashion is gender, and both fashion and gender evolve over time. But that's what makes the Hunger Games look so gay. The femininity of the Capitol isn't about looking gay, it's about the opulence of pre-revolutionary France. It's about some heads are about to roll like we're inventing golf. So the fashion of our evil overlords doesn't reflect this kind of opulence, even if they do own everything. It's about saying, hey, we're not rich snobs. We're just like the little people.
I'm just like you.
I think that's true.
You're just like me.
Yes, I can see.
Now we live in a culture where people insist that real men don't wear dresses, but that most certainly wasn't the case before. But if all of these elements of fashion are not inherent to gender but a series of trends that ebb and flow, what will the fashion of the future actually look like? Is gender ready to transform once more? But before we visit the future, first we have to go back in time. Despite living in prehistory amongst the dinosaurs, the Flintstones have a television. They have a car, they have offices and newspapers and clocks and bowling and opera, and they have, of course, gender roles. Fred goes to work, while his little lady Wilma stays at home and takes care of the housework. Their clothes are gendered. Fred wears a tie, Wilma wears her pearls, all is right with the world. Because the Flintstones isn't really about imagining prehistory, it's about 1960s suburban American life. A very, very white American suburban life. The term Flintstoneization refers to this tendency to imagine prehistoric humans to be the same as us. There's a comfort in imagining our contemporary gender roles as being so essential to our species that they've always been like this. We can validate our modern values by suggesting this is actually the natural state of being for humans. And after sitting through 5 billion sci-fi films and TV shows for this video, I would like to propose the term Jetsonization, because apparently we expect the future to be very, very gendered as well, like the Jetsons. A world where everything is automated and everyone is living in luxury. But for some reason, the husband still goes to work, even though all he has to do is press a button, and his wife is a housewife, despite having a robot to do all the housework. This isn't a future reimagined, it's just the 1960s with better washing machines. And this is generally how we tend to imagine the future. Girls will wear skirts and dresses, and boys will wear a suit and tie. In fact, maybe he will wear 2 ties at the same time. He will have 2 ties, and she will have 3 boobs. Oh, she's a secret agent? Yeah, but a sexy secret agent who wears her stockings on her face and fights fascism in high heels. Oh, it's a dystopian future? Yeah, but it's a piping hot dystopian future with the sexiest of oppressed chicks. Sure, Furiosa is a badass chick of the 2010s, but she's still wearing a corset. The original Star Trek imagines a future of equality, but not too much equality. Even in a Starfleet uniform, men wear a shirt, but women wear short little dresses with matching knickers. But that's kind of what you'd expect from the 1960s, right? The same way the sexualization of women in the 2009 Star Trek is also what you'd expect from that era.
Mini-skirted damsels. A little cold for that in space.
In the original series, women are always expected to wear short, sexy dresses. The 80s to noughties era always insisted that, while sure, women could wear similar uniforms to the men, there always had to be one hot babe who flagrantly disregarded Starfleet uniform regulations. And finally, in modern Trek, everyone just wears the same uniform, and it's all a bit less cringe. And while these are all meant to be portrayals of the future, often the same future, almost the same year, the gendered standards of the future are completely different depending on the year the show was made. But that's because sci-fi is not really about the future. It's about the present. It's about looking at our world and taking it to its inevitable conclusion, or maybe saying, here is a dystopia as a warning about all of these things we must avoid so we don't end up like this, or maybe a utopia saying, let's do this to create a better future. So Star Trek is a utopia. There's no more war or hunger on Earth. They've more or less achieved luxury space communism. Men and women are finally equals.
Are women considered more superior?
Women were often considered weak and inferior. That hasn't been true for a long time.
And we've often found that when a society is meant to be portrayed as egalitarian, women will wear some kind of uniform to show their equality with men.
Here, we're equal, men and women alike.
Because this reflects real-life fashion changes as women gained more rights. As women gained access to more spaces and activities, their fashion changed too. They gradually started adapting more menswear into their wardrobes. And you can see the progression in Star Trek. The original series imagines a more gendered, sexist future.
Can't get used to having a woman on the bridge.
Your world of starship captains doesn't admit women.
But as women's roles changed in real life, so they did in the future of Starfleet. Because sci-fi is social commentary, like Uglies, which asks, what if pretty people are rude? Or like Black Mirror, which asks, if we have electric things, won't they be bad? But what sci-fi does particularly well is comment on our present by defamiliarizing it. In theory, we all know social class is stratified. Some people are rich and some people are poor. But what if it was on a train with rich people at the front and poor people at the back, or the rich people at the top of a silo and the poor people at the bottom? By distorting the truth of our reality, everything suddenly becomes more visceral. This is the class system we know, but a lot more blunt. But when something isn't distorted, when things are kept the same, like perhaps gendered clothing in Star Trek, these things are naturalized. This is normal, an essential truth of how men and women really are. We may even have androgynous uniforms, but girls, of course, have long hair and boys have short hair because that's only natural. The way things are and always will be. Films shape our ideas about the past, whether true or not. We may not know what happened on the actual Titanic, but we all know what happened when Rose wouldn't let Jack on the fucking door. In the same way, films also shape our collective ideas about the future. Our projections of the future serve to validate our present. Rest assured that your role in society is innate to your humanity. It has always been like this and always will be. Never mind the great male renunciation, never mind that men used to wear heels and makeup and all that. The present is the proper way things are, and our future needs to reflect that. Oh, but verily, what about retrofuturism? That's not talking about the present at all, is it? Right you are, my hypothetical commenter. Recently, there's been a trend of retrofuturism, of shows like Fallout and Severance, which borrow from old sci-fi visions of the future, so we get these thick 80s computers and, of course, lots of little skirts for the ladies. So what's the function of retrofuturism? Well, firstly, there's a nostalgia and comfort in the aesthetic of retrofuturism, a vision of the future before everything turned to shit. Remember when we thought we were going to have flying cars before we learned that the planet was dying and all of our children have plastic in their blood? I'll take the flying cars, please. I thought we were going to get Rosie the robot, not Fido the murder machine. You know what? If you put K9 on top of one of these. But these shows do comment on the present, specifically on the lack of Rosie the Robot. They're looking back on old sci-fi optimism and saying, well, we now live in your future, and guess what? Rosie the Robot is dead. Oh, you guys thought all this cool new technology would make our lives better? Well, it didn't. It either doesn't impact the average person in any way, like we landed on the moon, so what, my life still sucks, or it actively poisons the planet and ruins our lives. But also, doesn't a more traditional aesthetic just fit with the cultural and political landscape of the 2020s? In an age of aspiring trad wives and alpha men, of Gen Z guys who are more conservative than their own fathers, a future that looks like the Jetsons is probably a lot more appealing than visions of beautiful men in miniskirts. Does look neat though, doesn't it? Like, I love the look of the new Fantastic Four, even if it does look like they'd pay Sue Storm 82 cents to the dollar. But because of retrofuturism, we are again sold an imagined future that is very gendered, very traditional. Boys will be boys, and girls will be girls. In our journey across the history of science fiction, my co-writer Ada and I kept coming across an interesting trope.
Women's lib? Or women's lib gone mad?
In these films and shows, there's a theme surrounding women's reproductive freedom. It's birth control gone too far. In the future, people will get to have loads and loads of casual Tinder hookups without any concern of having kids. Sometimes it's even gay. Ew. Maybe their babies are produced in a lab, parents not even raising them. Or maybe the men can't even get it up anymore. Or men are infertile. Or maybe there was so much promiscuity and homosexuality that we can't even have real sex anymore.
What do you say we just do it the old-fashioned way?
Ew, disgusting. The rampant exchange of bodily fluids was one of the major reasons for the downfall of society. After AIDS, there was NRS. After NRS, there was UBT.
You have to have weird artificial sex without touching.
We'll use the Orgasmatron.
And, of course, you need a license to get pregnant.
Abortion is also illegal, but then again, so is pregnancy if you don't have a license.
Women are disgusted by the very prospect of pregnancy.
Notice the distended abdomen? The infant will remain inside her for a few more months until it can fight its way out of her body.
But in the end, the natural order will be restored with the men on top showing everyone how to fuck properly and women getting pregnant like God intended. The heterosexual reproductive order is restored. Essentially what these films are portraying is an anxiety over reproductive freedom, over women's lib gone mad. But the reason we find this interesting is because while these are supposed to be feminist futures, too much feminism even, women's fashion in these films tends to be quite conventional. They're still patriarchally pretty, maybe even super sexy. They never make the women, like, butch. They have to remain sexy. And yet, men's fashion in some of these films is something else. Unbelievable! In 2019, Barbie creator Mattel introduced this new line of dolls, Creatable World, gender-neutral dolls looking like the non-binary children of Chucky. The doll itself is a blank slate of sex and gender carefully designed to neutralize any gendering features. It comes with clothes and wigs so that you can choose how you want to dress the figure, regardless of gender. Mattel saw Creatable World as the wave of the future, a future where all people would presumably be serving 7-year-old tomboy chic.
A lot of parents knew that this is the wave of the future, where society is heading, and they want to be on board on it. They just don't have the tools or the knowledge to kind of guide their child.
Obviously, this was going to be a controversial move. Anytime a company admits that gender non-conforming people exist, they can expect a reaction. Mattel was prepared for backlash, for protests even, but they selflessly went forward with this radical new doll. The reaction they got is worse than they could have possibly imagined. That is to say, nobody cared. Of the little reaction they did get, conservatives had emotional breakdowns, while the left saw it as a cheap ploy to make more money by creating a third gender demographic in kids' toys. But ultimately, I think the biggest letdown of Creatable World was that it wasn't Barbie. Where Barbie, as both a figure and a brand, is iconic, an over-the-top expression of femininity, always up to date with the latest fashions and fads, an embodiment of expression and joy and pink. Creatable World is just kind of beige. Who knew gender non-conformity could be so dull? They are so neutral, they don't even have a personality. And this is the problem with androgyny. If you do it wrong, there's just no personality. On multiple occasions, Star Trek tried to do gender-neutral aliens, and they just look like a 12-year-old in a onesie. Because androgyny is an equation. If you have a very feminine body, you can subtract feminine features and add masculine features. But while our vocabulary for femininity is big and bold and diverse, our vocabulary for masculinity is very limited. Because masculinity today is so strongly defined by the absence of anything interesting. Gender neutral means gender nothing. In a way, gender neutrality can easily end up embodying the neutrality of masculine fashion. If we call this kind of androgyny gender minimalism, then on the other end of the spectrum would be gender maximalism, which takes both extremely feminine and masculine features and uses them together. For example, Billy Porter in a tux top and a voluminous skirt. You don't subtract any gender. You just keep piling on genders like a bisexual at an orgy. So even while aiming for androgyny, it can still feel very gendered. Through the course of modern feminism, traditionally masculine clothing has been adapted into women's wear. It's acceptable for women to wear suits, trousers, even have short hair. We've even developed a vocabulary to do those things in a feminine way. A feminine suit will be cut differently, styled differently. But femininity on men is still pretty unacceptable. Billy Porter in a dress is newsworthy. It's seen as rebellious. And every time a male celebrity wears a dress one time, everyone freaks out like the revolution has arrived. And yet, nothing ever changes. We were rooting for you, Harry. And that's because the Great Masculine Renunciation didn't just make men's fashion less interesting, it made it so that fashion itself became associated with femininity. Women's clothes are fashion, men's clothes are just clothes. A guy on the red carpet might dip his toe into some glitter occasionally, but you won't catch men on the street wearing skirts the same way that women wear trousers. One of the reasons why the male uniform of the suit has been so firmly cemented and unchangeable for centuries now is because it positioned everything outside of itself as fashion, and fashion is feminine. To experiment with your look as a man, even a little bit, is seen as feminine and transgressive.
What on earth do you think you're wearing? The future!
Men are meant to be neutral, uniform, unassuming. There's nothing to see in the way men dress because men aren't meant to be looked at. They're meant to do the looking. You can cross the male gaze off your very bitchy bingo cards. The psychologist who coined the term the Great Masculine Renunciation actually suggested that this sartorial loss led to deep-lying psychological difficulties for men. Basically, they're fucked up in the head because they can't look pretty anymore. But this isn't how we tend to see men's femininity culturally. It's indulgent. It's decadent. It's degenerate, like the Hunger Games. When men are femme, it's a problem. Social commentary. And often these men living as betas in a world of empowered women embody this terrifying femininity. If the men look girly, something has gone horribly, horribly wrong with our future.
And here they are, 500 years later. No strength, no guts, no nothing.
In Zardoz, society has been stratified into two main groups: the powerful, beautiful, immortal Eternals who live in a stale former utopia, and the savages who live outside of it. The men of the Eternals are so feminine that we are told in detail, with illustrations, that they can no longer even get it up. But guess who can? Sean Connery, in his pants, a manly savage from the outside world who must restore the natural order by getting really, really hard and getting one of these immortal ladies pregnant for the first time in 200 years. Zardoz imagines a feminine future as a dystopian portrayal of masculinity in decay. And that's what so many of these films come down to: masculinity and decay. On paper, this might seem like a utopia. They're pacifists, moved beyond violence. Everyone is provided for. But the films tell us that the men are so pathetic that the women don't even want to bang them anymore. Sometimes the birth rates are down. Humanity is literally about to die out. These men's outfits are delicate. They're decorative, diverse. They use soft, flowy fabrics, silk and lace, robes and dresses. They sparkle. Their clothes are more revealing, more colourful. It's feminine by our standards, but it's also sometimes indistinguishable from what the women in these films are wearing. For the record, I'm not saying kimonos are feminine, but the movie Demolition Man tells us that they are, and they make men into pussies. So we're going to come back to this. In contrast, the hero of the film, our rugged male saviour, is tough and muscular.
My, you are so much more muscular than our men.
He's sometimes a cop or a soldier.
Anybody else want to negotiate?
And his clothes are simple and practical. They're ready to fight and they will lead the fight. But where does this trope come from? The earliest example we found of an androgynous future society was H.G. Wells' The Time Machine, and a lot of these movies seem to be directly inspired by it. In the novel, the adventure starts when a nameless time traveller who is definitely not Doctor Who travels to the distant future where he encounters the descendants of the human race, the beautiful childlike Eloi, who live in what seems to be a utopia and have all the survival instincts of my cat. Please don't try to eat another raw potato, I am begging you. In the book, the Eloi are giving more of a Hobbit vibe, but of course the adaptations portray them like this because this is film and women have to be, what? That's right, sexy with long hair. But in the book, the Eloi are completely androgynous to the point where the hero has a hard time distinguishing gender at all. They're a peaceful people who don't even have jobs, living in an abundant paradise. But this androgynous utopia isn't all that it appears to be.
Since your time, human evolution has diverged.
The time traveler discovers that there are another group of human descendants, the grotesque Morlocks, who live underground and never see daylight. By the way, this is the Wishbone adaptation of The Time Traveler, and we just have to take a moment to say, he's such a good boy, he's such a good boy. Now, the Time Traveler has to figure out what happened to humanity, and he decides that the Morlocks must be the descendants of the Victorian working class, like miners or factory workers, people who work underground and have, like so many university students, become nocturnal and live in the dark. The Eloi, on the other hand, are the descendants of the aristocracy whose lives are so cushy and easy that they devolved. They don't work, they don't hunt, they can't even read or wipe their asses anymore, basically the same as the rich people of today. They are so delicate, they have become physically smaller and weaker, but very pretty, which TikTok tells me is all that really matters anyway. Their androgyny is also a consequence of their undemanding lifestyles, the narrator tells us. Men don't have to be men, women don't have to be women, and they're not even particularly monogamous anymore. The nuclear family has collapsed in favour of communal living, and worst of all, they're vegetarians? But guess who's not vegetarian? That's right, at night the Morlocks come out and gobble up the little Eloi like they're jelly babies.
The Morlocks maintained them and bred them like cattle. They were being bred by the Morlocks, who had degenerated into the lowest form of human life.
The aristocracy losing their heads like it's the French Revolution all over again, taking the French Revolution slogan of eat the rich quite literally. A society divided into privileged androgynous aristocracy and an underclass of miners? Why does that sound so familiar? In the 1960 adaptation of The Time Traveler, our hero, who, by default, is the manliest man in the world now, must save the Eloi and get the hot girl, hopefully restoring humanity's future. And this is generally the vibe of these types of movies, where an androgynous society is saved by a heroic man from the past, either literally or figuratively. Because in the late Victorian era, when Wells was writing The Time Machine, Europe, and especially England, was super paranoid about this idea of degeneracy. Darwin said evolution exists and people were like, oh my god, but what if it goes the other way? What if we devolve into savages? Or worse, pussies? Because the other fear of the time was the collapse of the empire. The colonies were starting to rebel. Other countries like Germany and the US were gaining power, and Brits were worried that their rule was threatened. And we see that in the Eloi. The Eloi have it too easy. They've created a perfect world for themselves where there are no threats and no struggles. And that's bad, actually, because it made them lazy and weak, and consequently, they're being cannibalized by their former subjects. And androgyny is a big part of this, because Victorian middle-class masculinity was based on hard work and self-discipline. There was nothing natural about it. It was all about following strict rules of dress and behavior. The idea was that if you can control yourself, you can control your woman, your children, your workers and subjects. And that is the real threat of degeneracy. Men have to be strong to prop up the empire, and if masculinity collapses, so does the empire. And that's what, we are arguing, these feminine societies in sci-fi tend to represent. Men who don't work hard enough. They have become pathetic through lack of work and have lost control of their subjects. In Zardoz, only the beastly man can disrupt the complacent utopia and propagate the human race. In Demolition Man, the hero from the past must teach the vegetarian losers who don't have sex anymore because of AIDS how to eat meat and how to fuck. The men of this future wear kimonos, which the film tells us is feminine of them, but also suggests that America has lost its imperialist battle against Asia. In The Fifth Element, if it wasn't for manly ex-soldier Bruce Willis, the Earth would literally have been destroyed by a foreign threat. He must save the useless, degenerate, and possibly bisexual femmes who are completely useless. Even in freaking WALL-E. In WALL-E, the servant robots are running the show and controlling the Eloi-like lazy, incompetent humans who have devolved into fat and round and androgynous space babies. Even WALL-E himself is this hard-working male figure from the past. Even cute little WALL-E. But whatever, now we all know AI is shit, so fuck you, WALL-E. The film literally tells us that the people have devolved with a helpful illustration, and then when they start to re-evolve to love and work again, we get the Dawn of Man music from 2001: A Space Odyssey. It is evolution! So this is how we tend to imagine a feminine future. It's lazy. Because when fashion switched from being class-based to gender-based, utilitarian clothing went from being working-class clothing to being men's clothing, and decorative clothing went from being upper-class clothing to women's clothing, and all the implications associated with elite fashion became associated with women's fashion instead. It's excessive, impractical, decorative, superficial. That's why the Hunger Games can still use this idea of femininity as excess and opulence and have it be readable to a modern audience. I mean, partially because they tapped into historical designs.
Do you wear wigs?
But partially because we now associate femininity with all those evil upper-class things. And let's be honest, feminine fashion is often more impractical. Light colours stain more easily, delicate fabrics wrinkle and snag. Feminine garments are often restrictive and prioritise looks over comfort and durability. But historically, all this had a function. It signalled status. Impractical clothes were a flex. They meant you didn't have to work. But when this impracticality got transposed onto women, it stopped being a flex and became an accusation, marking women as frivolous and men as rational. Men's fashion was meant to reflect this new modern era post the French Revolution, the Industrial Revolution, the American Revolution. It was meant to be a more democratic fashion to reflect the values of modern democracies, a world where you don't inherit money and power, you build them through hard work. The American founding fathers strategically dressed in plain American-made clothes to demonstrate rugged patriotism and self-reliance and rejection of imported luxuries. Thomas Jefferson offended the British ambassador by greeting him in casual clothes and bedroom slippers instead of a fancy get-up. But he didn't need to dress like that. He was one of the richest men in America, and we know he secretly loved European fashion. The founding fathers were nepo babies from rich families. America wasn't built on democracy, it was built on genocide and slavery. This dress-down style wasn't a necessity. It was cosplay, and it's still cosplay. Because ideas tying femininity to degeneracy and aristocracy, they're a lie. Fashion can lie. The idea that someone like Elon Musk is not a disgusting, privileged, cruel, indulgent member of the capital elite is ridiculous. Donald Trump is not one of the people. There's no way that man has ever had to use a gas station toilet in his life. This dichotomy of the privileged femme elite and the masculine man of the people, it's nonsense. It's theatre. These are powerful fascists, complicit, just in the last couple of years, of some of the most horrific war crimes humanity's ever seen. And in the meantime, they're pushing legislation which pretends that the real threat to humanity is trans femme people who just want to use the toilet. One of the strangest things about the Hunger Games films is that the leader of this dystopian future is President Snow. In the book, he's described as having maybe lip injections or plastic surgery, and he looks horrible because that's what his own aristocratic vanity did to him. But the films just throw that out. This guy dresses more simply, sensibly, uniformly, in well-made suits with Gandalf eyebrows. He doesn't embody the fashion, the flamboyance of the capital, the way everyone else does. And I think the reason for that is because the films want us to take him seriously. And we know what serious business looks like in real life. We know what fascism looks like. We know what violence looks like. And this kind of violence wears a suit. Okay, let's touch grass. Ah, smells like dog pee. In the 1960s, when women started wearing men's jeans, the brands quickly picked up on it. In less than a decade, jeans had gone from masculine to neutral to gendered and sexy, which is pretty much the story of unisex fashion for women in a nutshell. Women's fashion was allowed to adopt menswear because it was adopted in a way that didn't break the fashion binary. Women could wear trousers and suits and still be sexy, still be the object of desire. Even a suit can look like a corset. Menswear became just another way to show off the female body. But this doesn't really work the other way around. Men can't adopt women's wear, and they can't adopt femininity. Can't even wear a bland skirt to the office, because the connotations of being superficial, decorative, of being the object, disrupt the whole gender system. Bell Hooks tells us our whole concept of masculinity hinges on violence and domination. If you're not an alpha, you're not a real man. That's why people cry about the crisis of masculinity every time patriarchy is even slightly questioned. Under patriarchy, masculinity and violence are one and the same. A man wearing a skirt isn't just a fashion statement, it's the fall of the empire. And that is why the fashion of the future in film is just so predictable and unimaginative, even when they do try something interesting, like when Star Trek briefly introduced these sexy uniforms for men. They're only visible in the background and quickly phased out, while the women must remain sexy. But in a weird roundabout way, if we read between the lines, these portrayals can still give us an interesting impression about the future. These films are saying, based on real societal changes, that this is where we're going. An androgynous future where women get reproductive freedom, where men lose their patriarchal power but gain the freedom to be whoever they want to be without the fear of experiencing an unmanly emotion or liking an unmanly thing. Where people can wear whatever they want regardless of gender. Where we've stopped imperial wars and we can just live in peace and abundance. These films might try to convince us these are bad things, but they definitely think this is where we're going. We just have to keep our fingers crossed that no time travelers from the past are going to come and mess it up for us. If you identify as a degenerate bitch from the future, please like and subscribe. Also, please consider supporting us on Patreon, which is how we're able to do videos like this. That would be much appreciated. Thank you to all of our patrons, and a very, very special thank you to this lot.